What is a service level agreement and what are the key issues in that type of agreement that you need to negotiate? That's what I want to talk about today. My name is Marcus Harris. I'm a software and technology attorney. For the past 20 years, I've devoted my practice to negotiating and drafting software-related contracts and litigating failed ERP implementations in courts across the country. So a service level agreement is a contract between the software customer and the software vendor, and really its purpose is to outline the expectations and the services that are going to be provided with respect to, in the software context, really, it's going to be uptime guarantees with respect to a SaaS platform, how often you're going to be able to access it, what the downtimes are going to look like, and then one of the other key elements of it really is what happens when those expectations or those obligations are not met. What kind of response is the vendor going to have, and ultimately what kind of remedy are you going to have as a customer? So with respect to the services that are going to be provided, I think it's generally pretty straightforward. It's going to cover downtime, uptime guarantees, when the software is going to be inaccessible for maintenance or whatever it is, how often that software is going to be available to you. I think it's pretty critical, in the SaaS context and ERP software specifically. This software is generally mission critical software that you run your business on, and so having that software up 95% of the time is probably not going to cut it for most customers. Ideally, you want to have 99.9, triple nines. Some vendors will have 99.7, and I think you need to look at the vendor that you're dealing with, their reputation, their size, their place in the industry, to kind of get a sense as to how comfortable you are with them. Maybe 99.7 is fine for somebody like SAP, but if you're dealing with a third-tier vendor, maybe that's not really going to cut it for you. The other element associated with this, let me back up. With respect to services, I think certainly the uptime guarantees are going to be important, but really the resolution and response times. So this could really include if there's an issue with the software that's preventing utilization, how fast is the vendor going to resolve that issue? Is it going to be within 1 hour, 2 hours, 2 days, a week, months? And all of those could be acceptable response times depending on the context. If there's a mission critical failure and the software is down and you can't ship product and you're losing hundreds of thousands of dollars, that's a different scenario that needs to be accounted for in the contract, and the vendor better have an obligation to respond quickly. Alternatively, you've got a scenario where there's a minor bug in the software that's kind of a nice to have. Maybe it's going to be addressed in the next release or the next bug fix or patch or something like that, and that's going to come out on kind of a regular schedule every 3 months, every 6 months, whatever it is, and maybe you can live with that. There's going to be a variety of different things in between those, and I think the goal with this type of contract is really to address the nuance in the gray areas so that you know what you're getting into and you know what your obligations are, or the vendor's obligations are, and you know what your remedies are. And so speaking of remedies, really what happens if the vendor is unable to make that software available pursuant to its contractual obligation, whether it's 99.7, 99.9, 95, whatever it is, what do you do if it's not up? And again, I think certainly the vendor responding quickly to get it up, but what if they can't? The issue becomes, okay, well, do I get a credit for the downtime? Are you going to give me a refund associated with the amount of time I was unable to utilize that software? What are you going to do? And I think you've got to account for those scenarios, think about them and incorporate them into the contract, know what's reasonable. And I think in the contracts that we draft, we would typically want a real obligation to make the software available for a certain percentage of time, a real obligation at least to respond within a certain fixed period of time, and then ideally to resolve issues within a fixed period of time. I think that's a difficult ask because the vendor's going to tell you, well, I don't know what the issue is, so I can't tell you I can fix it in 2 hours or 3 hours, and I think that's probably pretty reasonable. But what happens then If the vendor is unable to comply with its contractual obligations to make that software available to you, or to fix it, or address it via a response within a certain period of time, if they can't do that for repeated instances, I think you need to think about, what are you going to do? And in the contracts that we negotiate, we would typically put in some sort of a provision that would give them 3 bites at the apple. So within a certain period of time, whether it's quarterly, monthly, I think it depends on the technology, the functionality, and the software that you're licensing or accessing. If they can't make that software available and can't respond within certain fixed periods of time that are in the contract, more than 3 times in a given period of time, then I think you need to have the ability to terminate that agreement and ideally get some money back. You don't want to have a contract that terminates and then you've got a refund, or a credit from the vendor. That doesn't make a lot of sense, because you're no longer going to be utilizing that service or that software. So I think, look, if you focus on these things, I think you're going to get a service level agreement that is going to provide you with some real advantage, and it's going to be a document that you're going to be able to utilize and hold that vendor's feet to the fire. If you have any questions about any of the issues in this video, please feel free to reach out to us at taflot.com. We'd love to talk to you and point you in the right direction.